Welcome back to the shop. I'm Kirk Anderson. This week's project is a finger joint jig for the table saw. Now the majority of this jig is going to be made with 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. And the first thing to do is to cut down some of the pieces on the table saw. Now I will be gluing and screwing a rear fence to the base of this jig. And as with any glue up, you want to spread the glue out. Then I clamped the fence down to the base to temporarily hold it. And then I turned it over and pre-drilled into the fence to drive in the screws. As with most table saw jigs, runners need to be placed on bottom. I'm just placing dimes into the miter slots. That's so the runners will be raised up above the table saw surface in order to attach the base of the jig. Now just to temporarily secure the base to the runners, I'm using a couple of dabs of CA glue on the runners. Now once the CA glue had a chance to cure, I took the base off, turned it over, and I'm pre-drilling to drive in some screws. Now these runners are 3D printed that I ordered from a company on Etsy, and I'll have the link to that in the description. Now the front fence is actually going to be a series of fences. The first one, that's actually going to be attached to the base, is going to be made out of 2 pieces of 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. The first thing to do for this fence is to glue these 2 pieces together. I'll also be putting a couple of screws on each end of the fence to help secure it. And then to make sure that it's nice and tight, I'm clamping it down. Now you want the front fence to be at a 90-degree to the saw blade. So to accomplish this, the first thing I'm doing is cutting down the base to give me a reference point. Now using the cut as a reference point, I put a square on it, and then I put the fence up to the square. And then I clamped it down to temporarily secure it. Then I turned it over, pre-drilled, and drove in some screws. Now the first cut was just for a reference. Now this jig is going to be for 1/4 inch finger joints. So I switched out the blades, and now I'm using my dado blade for the 1/4 inch cut. Now the tall part of the front face is going to be made out of 5/8 of an inch Baltic birch plywood. And I'll temporarily secure it to the short fence in order to make a cut for the finger guide. I'll be making the finger guide out of walnut. Why? Because I have a lot of scraps of walnut around. Now I made sure that I cut the finger guide a little oversized, and that way I can sand it down to be a perfect fit. Then it's just a matter of gluing the finger guide into the tall fence. And I did put down some parchment paper to make sure that the finger guide doesn't get glued to the base of the jig. Now I use a cutoff from the finger guide as a spacer to set up the tall fence. Now once it's in position, I temporarily clamp down the tall fence. Now using some scraps, I made some cuts on 2 pieces. This is to test to see if the spacing is correct. Now, if this doesn't happen too often, right off the bat, I was smack on. No adjustments needed. Then it was just a matter of attaching the tall fence to the short fence with some screws, and the jig was ready to go. There are definitely more than one way to cut finger joints, but using a jig like this for the table saw is one of the easiest ways to cut finger joints. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, all you woodworkers out there, just get out there and cut some wood.